Professor Richard Kezirian. I didn't actually have a chance to ask Professor Kezirian, but he is the author of a book entitled American History, Major Controversies Reviewed. So I think in today's atmosphere of politics, he must be as happy as a clam at high tide. Professor Kezirian pursued his undergraduate and graduate studies through his PhD at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And he has been a faculty member at pretty much the whole 9 yards of higher educational institutions here on the peninsula. Monterey Peninsula College, Monterey Institute of International Studies, the Naval Postgraduate School. He is a multi-time winner of the Monterey Peninsula College Honor Society's Teacher of the Year Award. He's the author of the aforementioned textbook about controversies, and also participates in the community in writing op-ed articles for many California newspapers. He's the recipient of Monterey Peninsula College's President's Award, the Alan Griffin Award for Excellence in Teaching. And he is now the director at the Panetta Institute, where he conducts seminars and presents lectures and oversees much of the programming there, and as well as being a grant writer. So he teaches in the Congressional Institute internship program, and on and on and on. And we're so honored and thrilled that he is going to tell us why Congress has been going to heck in a handbasket for the last 150 years. Professor Kezirian.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to just, while I talk here, organize this a little bit for me. And it's so nice to see so many former friends, too. I mean, starting here at the, Sylvia here and Peggy, and I could just go around the room, Mabel. I can go around the room and just, it's so nice to see you again. I want to just thank you so much for inviting me. Wonderful to see everybody. I wish my wife could have come, but she has an appointment exactly at the same time as I was going to start speaking now. I'm also, when I hear these very, very kind and even over the top kind of accolades, you got to remember, I'm just a country boy from Fresno, California, and who worked hard. I give myself that. But my dad, gosh, he introduced me once to a fellow farmer as his son on welfare. I mean, if you weren't producing a crop or doing something major, I mean, it's no big deal. And I loved it because this fellow, my dad didn't know it, his son was a teacher. And so when my dad said that, he chewed him out, and I was just smiling there, just like this. Anyway, today I want to do the road to congressional dysfunction, and you can use the word despair or any other word. I want to kind of trace it all the way through how Congress got to this point. There's no doubt that racism is the big issue in the beginning. How much you think it is still there today is going to be your business after I, do the presentation. But you'll see very directly. And again, I'm focusing on Congress, but you'll see very directly that right at the beginning, it starts out because of that. And I'll keep an eye on the clock here. I don't want to go over. I want to save 10 minutes at the end for at least questions. And then I'm here if you want to do one-on-one questions after that. I'm not going to rush away. Now, just as a little bit of a background, remember now, Southerners, after the Civil War, because the Emancipation Proclamation, during the policies of Reconstruction, Southerners, you're not going to get elected if you run as a Republican. That's all there is to it. And so that was for 4 generations. On into the 20th century. And you'll remember this. I mean, all of you would remember this. The South was solid Democratic Party as a result of that. Well, what happens here as we move, the Republican Party is the Liberal Party, the party of abolitionists. the party that brought public schooling during the Reconstruction period to the South, the party that brought the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. It was a liberal party, but after the Civil War, big business explodes. I'll give you an example here. The Bessemer process of steel, I think it was something like 1867 it was invented. By 1900, you've got U.S. Steel, $1 billion corporation. Same way with the first oil well. It was something like 1857, the first oil well. By the late 1800s, 1890s, we've got John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil Company of America. He's bringing in an income $200 million a year. This is how explosive it is. And I could talk about the Vanderbilts and the Harrimans and on and on and on, J.P. Morgan. I mean, just tremendous. All of a sudden, this Republican Party has these liberals in it, and then it has the rise of big business. And sure enough, you're going to have the split there. And it comes in 1912, when Teddy Roosevelt ran as a progressive in 1912, the Bull Moose Party. The conservative Republicans never let those Bull Moosers back into the party. So what we have is, meanwhile, the Democratic Party is getting more and more liberal. It starts with Woodrow Wilson, though let me tell you, the racism there is tremendous. But there's so many other policies. Wilson, you have to go to Franklin Roosevelt before you get anything close to Woodrow Wilson and direct election of senators during his time. The income tax, income tax that's developed. You get child labor laws, antitrust laws. It goes on and on. And then, of course, Franklin Roosevelt's going to be even more dynamic. What happens is the Democratic Party then in the North has all these liberals, and in the Midwest and whatever. And it's an uneasy alliance. But what's going to happen is the parties flip. The Republican Party becomes a conservative party. I don't use that negatively. We need a good conservative party in our country. The Democratic Party becomes the liberal party as we move more and more into the 20th century. And I don't use the word liberal in a negative way either. But I wanted to give you that idea of a background there. So you've got these Southern Democrats and these Northern Democrats and Midwest Democrats and Western Democrats who are more and more liberal. They don't agree, but they're working together. And because they're working together, you get some progress. You get some progress on issues. And you know how this is, probably in your families, among your friends. There are people, I know in our family, particularly when Trump ran, it caused division among a number of us as a result. But they're good people, brothers-in-laws and brothers and this and that. And so you're at least talking. The Northern Democrats, Southern Democrats are at least talking to each other. And so you get progress, like Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. My goodness. But when you're compromising with these folks, like for instance, Social Security's passed. Ida Mae Fuller gets the first Social Security check, January 31st, 1940, $22.54. It was meant just to keep the elderly alive, because 75% of the elderly during the Great Depression, are on the verge of starvation. Just like today, by the way. Social Security keeps 15 million adults and 1 million children from starvation, from poverty today. I mean, it's key. Well, you're negotiating Social Security with Southerners. Well, you got to give in and make sure agricultural workers don't get it, though. You see, they don't want black sharecroppers getting it. Domestics are taken off the list too. Most domestics in the South are black. You've got to make these kind of deals, but you're at least making progress. The GI Bill, you all know about the GI Bill. Well, Southerners wanted to have the situation so that you don't have to give it to African Americans if they don't want to. So the wording in there allows for these type of things. So, but they're working together, okay, as a result of this kind of a thing. You got to watch out in this kind of a talk not to get too far off the track, but the same thing is happening in a way today. When Bill Clinton did his welfare reform, so the aid to families of dependent children, the federal government was running that. Well, the Clinton years changed it to TANF, right? Temporary aid to needy families. as a result of a block grant. So now all of a sudden that aid, that welfare aid, is a block grant. Well, let me tell you, out of and the statistics are just out now for 2020, out of the $31.6 billion for aid to the poor in the welfare reform, the poor only got 7.1 billion of that. 31.6 billion was authorized, 7.1 actually got directly into the hands of the poor. Well, what are these states spending it on? Well, Christian summer camps, absent, what do you call it when you, sexual abstention, you know, that kind of counseling, anti-abortion pregnancy centers. You know, a lot of this money is going to things like that. And I'm not knocking Christian summer camps and everything, but this money is not meant for that in this regard. Some of it goes for inspirational speakers. Can you imagine that? The poor at the end of the day are going to go listen to an inspirational speaker on marriage counseling. Anyway, you know, once you give this kind of power at state levels, look into Mississippi and what they're giving that money to. Oh my God. But anyway, I want to just let you know, as a result of this, you talk, you compromise, but you made some progress. Well, where does this shift come? When does it come? It comes with Harry Truman in 1948. Harry Truman, president, ends discrimination in the military. Truman creates the Fair Employment Practices Commission. Harry Truman supported the elimination of poll taxes. You know, that fee that you had to pay so that you could vote. And of course, that counted out poor and African American people. Truman spoke out against lynching. He supported anti-lynching legislation. He spoke out against segregation laws. Truman advocated for national health insurance. And that's all it took. And you know what happens. Democrats broke away, Southern Democrats broke away. They formed the Dixiecrat Party. Strom Thurmond was their nominee for president. And the election in 1948, Strom Thurmond wins the presidential popular and electoral vote in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina, and one electoral vote in Tennessee. You see how the shift starts. And it was with regard to Truman's program. Can you imagine? He's speaking out against lynching, speaking out against the poll tax and things like this. They break away as a result of this. Well, you know what follows right after that? The Supreme Court rulings, right? Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. Earl Warren is the Chief Justice. Separate is not equal. In fact, he wrote that majority opinion. It's tremendously eloquent in many sections. You know, Earl Warren was Attorney General in California during the Japanese-American relocation. And, you know, the documents were faked that were presented to the court. And because of his racism, he didn't look carefully enough. And he wanted to make sure as Supreme Court Justice, this did not happen again. And I give him credit for that power of growth that he had. You know, some of that crowd, like, people here in California that were in the military, Bendenson and Gullion, boy, they say it was a right thing to do all along. Earl Warren was determined that in that Brown versus Board of Education decision, it wasn't going to be 5-4. It's not going to be 6-3. It's not going to be 7-2. It's a unanimous decision. He twisted arms, and so you get, in addition to now the Dixiecrats breaking away, now the Supreme Court makes major decisions. The Baker versus Carr decision, 1962. Earl Warren felt that this was his most important legacy, Baker versus Carr. What that does is it allows the court to review the congressional districts. Because in the South, for instance, you had all these rural districts with little population and dominated by whites, and then where you had the congregation of African Americans in city areas, a lot of them would be counted out. And you had tremendous inequality. Baker versus Carr, 1962, allows for the court to look in at this, okay? And that's, Earl Warren felt that was the key important one there. Well, you know what? In 8 years, in the southern districts, they had 214 total in the Deep South there. It drops down to 130. You know, once you start getting things equal, it drops down like that. And then you get Gray versus Sanders next in 1963. Gray versus Sanders is the one person, one vote ruling. Now, you know, the South was just terrible this way, but they're not the only one. What about Illinois? Illinois, before you get Gray versus Sanders, you get one congressional district, had 119,000 voters in that district electing one member of Congress. There's another district in Illinois with 912,000 voters electing just one member of Congress. Where is that congressional district in Illinois located? Chicago, right? The South is in another ballgame here, but Illinois is not perfect either. You know what the worst state was? The worst state, I keep hitting this microphone here, I gotta organize myself a little bit better. The worst state was Michigan. What area are they cutting out? Yeah, you bet. I mean, it's just really sad. You'd look at these numbers, and I just took one from the Illinois area. And then you get Reynolds versus Sims, 1964, that says all congressional districts have to have almost equal number of voters in it. And it was those key cases, 62, 63, 64. Now, you know, one of the great conservative intellectuals at that time is William Buckley. And I don't, you know, he had a magazine, and he's writing about this, making commentary on this. I just pick out one of his opinion pieces, 1957, Why the South Must Prevail. Here's one of the things he writes. You could go on for an hour on this stuff, but let me just give you this right here. The central question that emerges is whether the white community in the South is entitled to take such measures as are necessary to prevail politically and culturally in areas where it does not predominate numerically. The sobering answer is yes. Yes is in bold type with an underline. The white community is so entitled because, for the time being, it is the advanced race. You know what I do when I do a PowerPoint presentation on this to my class? Right after, you know, I have Bill Buckley's photo, and then I have this quotation right in the square next to it. My next PowerPoint presentation, I show a lynching. These whites cheering the advanced race as a result. Today, we didn't have quite the setup for this kind of a thing, so I didn't do that. Next big jump, 1964. Barry Goldwater is nominated to be the Republican president of the United States. One of his key platform planks is Brown versus Board of Education is unconstitutional. He also called for, you know, I don't know if you remember that book, Conscience of a Conservative. He also called for the elimination of Social Security, elimination of federal aid to schools, an end to federal welfare, an end to federal farm programs, as well as an end to union shop. He wanted to defund the UN, and he wanted to improve tactical nuclear weapons for more frequent use. In that vote, Goldwater wins the popular and the electoral vote in Arizona, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and South Carolina. You see, the shift is really coming. States won by Johnson, where Goldwater does 4 more percentage points higher than his average, his national average. If I include these, let's throw in the state of Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Indiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, and Idaho. There it is, red states right there. I mean, you see, and what started it all, I would say, is definitely racism across the board here. Now we're going to go into other factors too that I think are important, and to be fair, there's a lot of concern about these other issues too as we go along. By the way, the Republicans learned that You can't be this blunt. And so we have the development of what is called dog whistle politics. And you know a dog whistle is that ultrasonic whistle that we don't hear a dog does. In politics, it means coded language. So you don't come out and say Brown versus Board of Education or Baker versus Carr or Reynolds. Those are unconstitutional. You talk about states' rights. Let me I give two examples in the PowerPoint presentation because you could just start and go on and on and on, but I do Ronald Reagan kicking off his presidential campaign in Neshoba County Fair, Philadelphia, Mississippi. And what's he talking about? States' rights. States' rights. He never makes mention of the fact 5 miles away is where Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were murdered. You know, those young civil rights workers, Andrew Goodman, James Cheney, Michael Schwerner were murdered there. Again, you know, they show these, and they're, you know, doesn't say anything, and it's right there, 5 miles away. To be bipartisan, the next slide I show is Bill Clinton. You know, remember Bill Clinton ran on Law and Order too. So he's down there in the South on Super Tuesday, and he's given a speech. Where is he giving it? Stone Mountain, Georgia. Right there where Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson and, Jefferson Davis, Stonewall Jackson, and Robert E. Lee, how could I forget? Right there on that monument that dwarfs, it dwarfs, Mount Rushmore. And who's standing behind Clinton? 30 prisoners, all in their prisoner uniform. And this is why PowerPoint can make things really dramatic. 27 of them are black. See, I counted them up, in that regard. So, he was using coded language there also, Law and Order, but trying to win Southern votes, playing the racial card. Though, Clinton isn't a racist. I don't know if I would say Reagan is. They're just doing the political game here. But you get the rise of dog whistle politics here. Well, now you get Lyndon Johnson's presidency. Well, Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965. Lyndon Johnson passed 87 major bills. 87. And you get, in that Great Society program, you're getting white Southerners decamping from the Democratic Party in overwhelming numbers. Because there's also to be fair, there's also the great concern of too big a government, too much government. And that's a valid concern too among conservatives. You also get the immigration reform bill that took away all the racist aspects of our immigration reform. So it's the Immigration Act of 1965. And just give you an example here, what it does is it offers every country in the world equal access to getting to the United States. And at that time, 20,000 a year. Well, let me just, because I happen to remember this, 1965, 32 Koreans came to our country, okay? And they were basically, probably all 32, going to be the wives of the soldiers who were based there. 1966, the Immigration Act is in effect. 20,000 Koreans come to the United States. 1967, 20,000. 1968, 20. Before you know it, you got a little Korea in Chicago. You got a little Korea, I don't know other places. But we didn't have Iraqis here starting 1966. Iranians. You see, around the world, do you know no country in history has had this much change, diverse change, as quickly as the United States since 1966? And you know what's going to happen is the backlash. I thought, when Obama won, I went, we beat this. I felt like, oh my God, we're beating this now. And you even had a woman as a vice presidential nominee in the Republican Party. And I go, wow. And boy, the backlash came, huh? Just like it came against the Irish in the 1840s and 50s and 60s. Just like it came against, my dad's background is Armenian, my mother's Swiss Italian. just like those Italians and Armenians, the Greeks, the Jews, that great period of immigration, 1880s to 1915. But I thought we had missed it. But no, the nativism really has kicked in, hasn't it? And it's something you always have to work against. But anyway, I wanted to just let you know it's a human nature kind of thing here, and we're right in the middle of it here. Anyway, so we get Lyndon Johnson, civil rights bills, we get the Great Society programs, 87 major bills, and then the African American riots occur. 1965, the Watts riot. I mean, and you get, my dad, because he remembers back, he's a Depression, World War II generation, my dad and mom. It's Franklin Roosevelt who put those 41 major dams in the Sierra Nevada mountains and the 1,000 miles of canals that bring that water right to that Central Valley that make all these farmers, give them a life during the Great Depression. So he's voted Democrat. But then he sees these riots like this. And then what I'm going to talk about is a protest coming up, and he begins to turn. That's when he moves to the Republican Party. I mean, he never had a chance to go to college. My Uncle Archie, who was a great debater in college, Fresno State College, it was called back then, wanted to go to law school. Depression hits, World War II, and then they see this protesting, but anyway, the Watts riot, 34 dead, more than 1,000 injured, 4,000 arrested, 10,000 black protesters marauding through an area and burning 46.5 square miles. And it's all on TV, pulling white folks out of cars and beating them up. And then you had the next year, 66, 43 cities were burning. I don't know if you remember 1956, 1966, America was burning. And then 8 major cities in 1967. And if you counted all the smaller cities too, 1966, in that 43, if you counted even the smaller cities, there's over 200. So you can imagine how you're getting a lot of people getting caught up in a backlash against this kind of thing. And then the Vietnam War protest, occurs, and more and more people decamping from the Democratic Party. And Richard Nixon notices this, election of 1968. He notices this, and you've heard about Nixon's Southern strategy. We can finally go after those Southerners and bring them into the Republican Party. And you know the story here, once he's elected. By the way, he wins 32 states, okay? And he would have won more, except George Wallace was running, wasn't he? On a segregation platform. So George Wallace wins Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and he gets 1 electoral vote in North Carolina. Nixon, except for Texas, stayed loyal to Johnson with Humphrey, but otherwise Nixon takes them all through the Midwest and West, except California, Oregon, and Nevada hung in there for Hubert Humphrey. But anyway, and you know what happens in 1972? Nixon against McGovern, he wins everything except Massachusetts and 3 electoral votes in Washington, D.C. But our local story here, when Nixon decides not to enforce the civil rights laws, well, you know who was head of the civil rights division in the Department of Justice? Leon Panetta. And Leon Panetta, that's one thing with the Panettas, they're going to do the right thing on these things. He's going to enforce the law. And he tells the story. He's back home. He wakes up one morning, gets the Washington Post, and the headline is, Panetta resigns. He calls the White House. Hey, what's going on? I didn't resign. He said, come on over here. We're going to talk to you. Yeah, he's fired for enforcing the law. And of course, this really will be, well, since then, you pretty much have the Southern Democrats now out of the Democratic Party as a result. Well, let's start getting some of the cultural divisions now. Roe versus Wade, 1973. By the way, I have an outline. I thought it'd be easier just to go down with an outline like this, and I think it'll be helpful on the test right after I talk. You're free to refer to it. I used to hate what do they call them, those tests they give that they spring on you in class? Oh, God. I could do all right if I was warned. But Roe versus Wade, 1973, that's polarizing. And then so many other issues besides that, all these wedge issues, busing, crime, taxes, school prayer, gay issues, teaching of evolution, creationism issues, 10 Commandments, anger with the Environmental Protection Agency. I mean, it goes on and on here. White Southerners just decamped from the Democratic Party, but so did others, legitimately upset with the direction of the country. White blue-collar workers, Republicans who oppose big government, socially conservative Catholics, evangelical Protestants, are now really strong Republicans, where before, like I said, and my parents too, where before they really felt, all that the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt and Truman did for them is now lost. Well, now let's move to the Democratic Party and reforms during the Vietnam War period and unintended consequences. That famous law of unintended consequences. Those young Democrats really upset because the senior members were killing efforts to get out of the war. So I don't know if you know this, starting in 1969, you had these young lions in the Democratic Party make these changes. More power is going to be conveyed to subcommittee chairs in Congress and committee chairs. And the rank and file are going to have more power. More authority is given to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The super committees, Ways and Means and Appropriation, are going to be weakened. Congressional committee and subcommittee chairs had to have the approval of the majority of the party. This would work both ways in Congress. What happens is after seniority fell, no one in Congress was immune to party discipline anymore. And so members came to be judged every day on how they voted with the party, how much money they raised for their colleagues, how reliably they stood with their team in rhetorical fistfights against the other side. So the ideological majority in each party has greater leverage. And you're really seeing this play out now, don't you, as a result of this? And then regular order was abandoned also. Regular order means that when a bill is introduced at the committee level, you used to always allow the opposition to voice their concerns, about the bill. Boy, that was dropped. Nobody goes through regular order now. Not even Obama and Obamacare. Both parties, once discussed, is bypass the other side here. And the Senate's going to make changes. I won't go into all the Senate changes that will mirror the House changes. You can imagine now the tone and content of political debate is going to coarsen as a result of this. See what the unintended consequences are? They're just trying to get us out of the Vietnam War. And then you have these long-term rules here that are going to be very, very damaging. Tone and content of political debate begins to coarsen. Conflict encouraged. Disparaging the honor and the intentions of your opponents. Now, I know that this is low-lying fruit, okay? But I just had to quote this one here, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I just want to let you know where this has gone. She's just giving us a talk to young students in Texas, just recently. And I just pulled a little bit out of the talk. My Democratic colleagues are kind of night creatures, like witches and vampires and ghouls. Can you imagine? I mentioned to Secretary Panetta, did you know this about Jimmy? I didn't know. He got a kick out of that, though my sense of humor doesn't always go over with him. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know about that. Then you get the rise of interest groups. Once you get the situation with the Supreme Court rulings, Buckley versus Vallejo, then Citizens United, you know, the money starts pouring into these interest groups. And I'll talk a little bit about money in elections in just a minute. And you know what? In an open and free society, people have a right to petition their government and organize on behalf of causes. I mean, that's our right. I mean, if a person cares deeply about abortion, just voting isn't going to make you feel like you've really done a lot. But if you can be part of an organization that's going to monitor legislation, that's going to move it to the political agenda, where you can give some money. You can see whether it's the Sierra Club or whatever group, you know, it's going to make a big difference and people feel more involved here. But you get interest groups growing, you know, and there's African American interest groups and women's interest groups, on and on. But they have more and more of an input too in the situation, starting in the 1960s. I want to put the airplane here also, or the jet, I should say. You know the way it is right now, and we really see this at the Panetta Institute because of the fact that we do an internship program. But these members of Congress, if they can, they want to get there as late as they can on Tuesday afternoon, get as much done as they can Tuesday, and then Wednesday, they're there all day, and get out of there as fast as they can on Thursday. Because you've got to keep in touch with your constituency. They're running every couple of years. And you've seen some really high-profile cases where members of Congress didn't keep in touch, and out they went, right? Well, you're trying to run the United States of America on Wednesdays? So I really think that that's been a great, great detriment to members getting to know each other. I decided to count this up a little bit. In the 1960s and 70s, Congress was in session on average 323 days. So you stayed in Washington. You got an apartment in Washington, or you moved your family to Washington. You get to know people. Your kids might be playing on the same girls softball team or boys baseball team, et cetera, et cetera. You know how that goes. In the 1980s, 278 days was the average. Do you know, just recently, and I'm placing interns and watching this, I wasn't sure if Congress was going to make 100 days. And they just made a little over 100 that year. Now, I haven't counted since, but I just want to let you know it keeps dwindling. And, you know, you have this trying to run the United States on Wednesdays. And you're in and out, in and out. How do you get to know your colleagues? To work with them? You don't. That's all there is. Then you get the 24-hour news cycle. The increased media attention leads to a different type of leadership also, away from the consensus builders and towards the flamethrowers, right? Partisan messages become the rule. The fairness doctrine, that's what many of us in this room grew up on, right? You know, if you didn't bother putting Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, you didn't bother bringing somebody on your show like Rush Limbaugh, because if you gave him a half hour, you got to give Rachel Maddow a half hour. You know, they just tried to do the best they could because of the fairness doctrine. That went out in 1987. I don't know how you, with all the cable news now, I don't know how you would do it anyway. But, you know, it's really, I don't know if you know this, but we're the only democracy that runs our elections through the media. And as a result, the media's values are not the party's values here. And you know, party platforms don't make big news, you know, but who's ahead? The horse race. Who's losing? A gaffe that somebody made, or this, you know. The media doesn't tell you who's really good at working the backroom scenes and build consensus. They got different values, okay? They need something new. You know, the same old Democratic Party platform on labor unions, I mean, that's not going to be a winning headline. So these are all these factors, I think, that I'm putting together to show the polarization in Congress and eventually outside too. Then I want to mention money in elections. Secretary Panetta said he always tried to get at least 75% of his money from the district. But congressional elections are so expensive now that you got to go to the interests, they call them. In other words, the big corporations. And, you know, when you need a couple of million to run, to run an election. I mean, if somebody were to run against Jimmy Panetta in this district, with the Panetta name, I mean, my God, they need $4 million probably. You're going to have to go to Standard Oil, Chevron, Apple, and then how much you're indebted to them. So money is really perverted things too. I got one quotation here, keeping an eye on the clock now. When Trump is running in 2016, at the end of 2015, now looks like he's gonna be the nominee here in 2016. Remember Les Moonves of CBS? Listen to him, what he says. Trump may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. Man, who would have expected the ride we're all having right now? The money is rolling in, and this is fun. I've never seen anything like this. And this is gonna be a very good year for CBS. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to say, but bring it on, Donald. Keep going. Donald's place in this election is a good thing for CBS. Well, the Democrats are going after money too. I'm just saying, CBS gets free, television waves or whatever you call them and everything. They shouldn't get money like this too for what they're doing. Another thing too I blame for members of Congress not getting to know each other and not working together is the computer. Now let's take Secretary Panetta before the computer age. He's in Congress in the 1970s, and an agriculture bill, he's pretty good on agriculture, so let's pick a bill in some manufacturing area comes up. He would go to get information on this on the members in Congress who are the real brains in the area of manufacturing or in agriculture. If it was a Midwest issue, you go to so-and-so. And the smartest person, who the smartest person is, whether it's Republican or Democrat, you'd go to either side. Who's the best person to get some information on? Not that you're going to vote for this bill, but to get information. Now you don't even bother, you got the computer. You got your staff assigned to these different areas. And so I see this close up. You just don't communicate again with the other side. So the computer has had a negative situation. And then you get gerrymandering. And you know what? The court is now, you saw, this North Carolina situation is so gerrymandered. It's unbelievable. The court refused to rule against it. And now they're going to take up Baker versus Carr. And I'm wondering what they might do to Baker versus Carr. It's amazing here. A couple of the presidencies I'll take a look at. Ronald Reagan is going to be polarizing too at the level of symbol and inspiration. He's going to accelerate the trends. Even though he could bargain and not hold grudges. Jimmy Carter, when he holds grudges a little bit. Reagan was good, he compromised and this and that. But at the level of symbol and inspiration, he accelerates those trends towards more partisanship. I mentioned Philadelphia, Mississippi already. You remember Edwin Meese as Attorney General? He closed down the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Justice. And in the executive branch, Reagan will close down the Civil Rights Commission. This is not the time to be closing that down. It's a time to be still working more on that. Then you get a big change with Newt Gingrich coming in. I mean, Newt Gingrich is a major turning point here. He arrives in Washington, 1979. His goal was to encourage, and I'm taking it now from the memos that were circulated by Gingrich's team, encourage Republican members to sharpen their differences and promote clear lines of division between parties. And during his speakership, let me just quote from the memo again, 1990, it was entitled Language, a Key Mechanism of Control. Speak like Newt. Use words like sick, corrupt, bizarre, pathetic, destroy, decay when characterizing Democrats. Democratic politicians are, quote, out of the memo, enemy of normal Americans, and it calls for a war against the left to be fought with, quote, a scale and a duration and a savagery that is only true of civil wars. Boy, so you get Newt Gingrich, I mean, he is he is a significant turning point, if indeed you need a turning point by this time. Well, you know who follows Newt Gingrich as Speaker is going to be Jim Wright, the Democrat Jim Wright. He was just as bad. So you get two of them in a row, just as bad. Jim Wright will succeed Tip O'Neill in 1987. Well, let's go to the Bill Clinton presidency. I'll say a little about presidencies, and I don't need, this is also recent. I can breeze by some of this. But Bill Clinton really does evoke powerful emotions as a cultural symbol. Marital infidelity right from the beginning, Paula Jones. Draft dodging was a big deal back in those days still. And then Monica Lewinsky, my God, talk about so much undiscipline here. And then his policies angered Republicans. Personally, I would probably support most of this. Healthcare, tax increases. Do you know the tax increases of Clinton? You know, just raised the high tax rate, a few points. And remember the surpluses? Remember the surpluses that you had going into the Bush presidency? And it was just a few points. This was my opportunity when I used PowerPoint, and I drilled it in as much as possible, to show when I was growing up, the Eisenhower years. What's the tax scheme look like? There are 26 stages in the tax category, 26, with the highest tax rate, 71%. Now, you know, you get write-offs, of course, if you're in business. Our situation now is 7. Okay, 7. And after 519,000, 37% tax rate. You wonder why Eisenhower had 3 balanced budgets and the deficit was going down in relation to GDP. I mean, people paid their taxes, and I grew up in the 30 glorious years. It all began to be changed starting in 1980s, and that would solve the debt ceiling situation right now. Let's go back to Eisenhower's tax scheme. 26 different categories, not 7, ending at 519,000, and have it go. You know, it goes all along, 51, Anyway, whatever. Different world, I guess. But, it was easy for Republicans to really mobilize and unify their conservative base with Clinton's undisciplinary behavior here. And then George Bush comes along, George W. Bush. You know what? He was a good governor in Texas. Compassionate conservative. I had great hopes for him. Because I knew, God, we need someone to bring people together. I thought maybe he could. His father was a good president. His father really was. And I was hoping. And I could use in my history classes the example of Thomas Jefferson. During the Jefferson presidency, the Federalists and Democratic Republicans, Hamilton's going to die in a duel. Hamilton's son going to die in a duel. There's fist fights in Congress. Jefferson brings everybody together. And, I'm able to show how Jefferson does it. I said, oh my God, if Bush could do something like this. And Jefferson does it by having people like Madison as Secretary of State and Albert Gallatin as Secretary of the Treasury. I mean, you start to get really first-class people. Well, so did George W. Bush start off that way. Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, but then John Ashcroft. You bring a race baiter as your Attorney General, and then Secretary of the Interior, Gail Norton, the Attorney General in Colorado, who allowed a corporation to dump toxic waste in the Alamosa River and kill every single thing for 17 miles. And as Attorney General, she wouldn't prosecute that corporation. And she's going to be Secretary of the Interior. And then Karl Rove's impact here. And as a result, you never get any compromise. And so you have the 1.35 trillion tax cut, which just blows the surplus. Another tax cut after 9/11, going into Afghanistan like he did, Iraq. I could go on and on, pulling us out of the Kyoto Protocol. It just, it's polarized there. And then you get the Obama presidency, Obamacare, not doing Republican opinion, when you pass things without bipartisan support, you've got problems. Because the agency needs to see, well, what's working and what isn't, and you're going to have the opposition, if they weren't included, going to try to undo this thing all along. So it's you know, I could go through each of these presidencies and say more and more and more here, but I'll just stop there and go to my conclusion so that I have time for question here. Now, how do we solve this problem? How do we get out of this dysfunctional cycle? Well, a first step, and this is what I tell my students, and every time I'm talking to groups like yours, a first step, and this is going to be hard. People need to recognize that every public policy, every human position, I would say even system of belief, has a problem with it. Believed in too much, it slides into error. Now, it's not that no fixed system of belief isn't correct. It's not that none is correct, but it's not correct for long. I mean, I love that immigration bill. That was the Kennedy-Bush immigration bill. Dennis Hastert refused. He was the speaker then, the Hastert rule. If the majority of my party isn't for it, I'm not even bringing it forward. They had the votes. They had the Republican. They had enough Republican votes, Democratic votes, to have a good immigration bill right there in 2001, too. Instead, they kicked the can down the road. Well, you see what's happening as a result of that. Dennis Hastert, see what the unintended consequences, Democratic reforms, giving power to a speaker like that? Of course, Dennis Hastert now, I don't think he's died yet. He's just gotten out of jail. He was a wrestler, middle school kids, and abusing middle school kids. You know about that. Pedophile as a result. This guy's Speaker of the House, and geez. But it's not that no system of belief is correct, but it isn't correct for long. That bill would not work now. And we perpetually fail to notice this, blinded by our desire, and I'm guilty of this, to settle in, to finally stop fretting about things, to find an agenda and stick with it. You know, I tell my students, hey, don't be this way, go with the data here. You know, reconsideration is hard. You have to deny yourself the comfort of always being the same person who arrived at an answer some time ago, and you never had any reason to doubt it. But it's all right to reconsider. It's noble. In this venue here, I would say it's holy even. Now let's just give you an example, my teaching of history. And this is why the subject of history is always relevant. We ask questions of the past based on the challenges we face today and the situation that we have today. And as a result, today, we're asking more and more questions about women's role in the past, minority role in the past, what Black Americans contribute, how were they really treated? You're asking all these new questions, and when you ask these new questions, new documents, you notice new documents as a result of this. Now, I remember as a high schooler how I thrilled at Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden, 1899, written to encourage the United States to go into the Philippines. You know, these are childlike peoples. Go in there and lift them up. Well, if you want to know what European colonization did, read Adam Hochschild's King Leopold's Ghosts. Have you ever read that? Oh my God. It is, by page 17, you'll never stop. It's terrific. Adam Hochschild, King Leopold's Ghosts. If you want to know what European colonization was really like here. Or consider this description by a young officer of an attack on the rebellious Parthans in British India's northwestern frontier. I mean, listen to this. We proceeded systematically, village by village, and we destroyed the houses, filled up the wells, blew down the towers, cut down the great shady trees, burned the crops, and broke the reservoirs. At the end of a fortnight, the valley was a desert, and our honor was satisfied. That's Winston Churchill, young Winston. When I was in college, you never heard anything like this, but you get people of color looking at the new documents, given their concerns, but all I heard about is World War II, which rightly he deserves great credit for. I'll give you another example in Western civilization. After a closer look at reconsideration, I saw that the Golden Age of Greece was not a golden age for women. The Renaissance was not a Renaissance for women. I mean, if you started to look at it, you know, as women become more prominent, minorities become more prominent. I mean, no major historian looked back at women in history except for royalty, if they were royalty or significant that way, back in the 1960s when I was going through school. And personally, myself, living through the second and third blooms of the civil rights movement, you know, Reconstruction after Civil War is one, and we could include the abolitionists in that story, and then 1960s, and I'd say we're in the third bloom of the civil rights movement. You know, now that I've lived through both the second and am living through the third bloom of the civil rights movement, I realized I really couldn't say I knew my country unless I took into consideration the thinking and the concerns of African Americans and women and LGBTQ plus people. How can you say you know your country if you aren't considering them? Now, what if I, and I'm wrapping this up here, what if I had settled in with a judgment regarding American slavery that was presented in my college history textbook, The Growth of the American Republic? Samuel Eliot Morison taught 40 years at Harvard, Henry Steele Commager, 20 years at Columbia, and also taught a little at Amherst and some at New York University in about a 50-year career. Here's this textbook in print since 1969, in print until 1969. I'll just give you one quotation out of it. There is much to be said for slavery as a transitional status between barbarism and civilization. Can you imagine? What if I didn't reconsider this? What if I didn't keep an open mind? You know, as I've learned more and have broadened my knowledge, I came to see the value of Inspector Armand Gamache's advice to young detectives. Are you familiar with Louise Penny? Okay, those mystery novels. And when he has a young detective, he says there's 4 things that you need to learn and know. You got to be able to say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I don't have the answer. I need your help. Would that more members of Congress, and all of us too, take the advice of Armand Gamache? Anyway, I've got time for questions from the audience here. This lady has her hands up first. And like I said, I'll be here as long as I have people that have questions. Yes, ma'am.
One of the proposals I have heard is to expand the number of congressional representatives. And it was pointed out that Congress initially intended that there be something like 132,000 people per congressional district. But at one point, they just made the number static. That would increase the influence of urban areas and decrease the red states quota. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't know I understand the problem. Originally, it's 30,000, 30,000 population for one person. And then they get up to the beginning of the 20th century and they decide on 435 as a result of that. I'm not sure if that's the answer, but let me tell you this, I encourage people to think about this problem. Remember back in 2010 where the Democrats really lost badly, after 2 years of Obama, lost badly in the midterm elections? Democrats across the country in congressional voting won the majority. They won more than Republicans. So you've got this gerrymandering issue. And so if you did expand it and have a situation where the voters are picking their members and not the members picking their voters, because with computers you can really get good at this, maybe it would work. I'm not sure that it just would, just the sheer numbers of it would be the answer. But that's I've been taking a peek at it, but I know something has to be done here. You know, the way it's going now isn't working. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. And as I mentioned, I'm still here for any one-on-one questions. I think I set a record for hitting the microphone in this during this talk.